to Reanimated. It's episode 131. I am Stuart. Joining me is AJ Conrad on the East Coast. What's up? How are you doing?
Doing well here on the East Coast. Getting caffeinated, feeling good.
Nice.
Ready to talk about undead, re-dead, reanimated things. You know, that kind of stuff.
And today, the undead du jour is the movie Girl with All the Gifts. Back in episode 79, I think it was, we talked about the book and raved about it. And it's taken this long even though we talked about the movie a lot in that episode because I went back and listened to it. The movie just came out in the States. So now we've got some more fodder on the adaptation of the book by M.R. Carey. And I believe he wrote the screenplay for what we've just seen.
He did, and I think he was a consultant on set too.
So pretty involved. But before we get to that, we have, I don't know, a couple of newsy things to go over. So take it away, AJ.
Great. So in the Tribeca Film Festival in 2016, a little independent horror film premiered called Here Alone. And it's slowly been making the rounds through a couple of film festivals, and it's now going to get a release in March. Not clear yet. I think it is going to be in theaters, but not sure how widely released it will be. But the trailer looks pretty good. It freaked me out. How about you, Stuart?
It's got a baby in it.
I know.
Tough. That's tough. Babies in the apocalypse, Judith notwithstanding, because, I don't know, Judith feels pretty bulletproof at this point in The Walking Dead. But you don't know in untrodden territory. You don't know how they're gonna go there. And based on the trailer alone, it doesn't look like the baby does too well.
No, although you don't know. Maybe they're trying to, maybe there's something that we're not aware of. That's what I'm choosing to believe for now. But makeup looks good, at least in the trailer. Effects look good, and so
It's very well edited. It's a very well edited trailer.
Yeah, so I think we'll probably be reviewing this in the future, and we'll have a little bit more news about how it's being released. But did you have something else you wanted to chat about?
I guess sadly, that's kind of it. There were a couple of articles floating around this week about how The Walking Dead's ratings have been sinking, but that AMC is saying they're committed to the show going down the line. But then both of these articles that I saw that talked about sinking ratings did not cite any sinking ratings. All they cited was an AMC spokesperson saying that the channel was dedicated to the franchise for the immediate future. So I think, well, first of all, I think it was a little bit of bad journalism not putting in there like, hey, you can't say that the ratings are going down in the headline and then not say what they're doing. So I mean, I wouldn't doubt, kind of after season 6, that the ratings probably aren't performing quite as well. But it's 7 years in. That's a long time for any TV show that isn't a Seinfeld type.
True. I also feel like there's a lot going on in the world, like people being, assassinated at airports with VX gas. So, which is totally insane. So I don't know. It'd be interesting to see if ratings overall for things are going down, because it feels, at least just in general, it feels like people are a lot, I don't know, like a lot more focused on real world events right now. I could be wrong, but just a sort of general observation. But look, this show has been around a really long time. This is something you and I have discussed at a few different points. Is there a point where it just becomes like sort of, I don't want to say pointless, but you're rehashing old ground? Like, how many new perspectives or how many new storylines can you present without it feeling like you're rehashing old storylines? And even in the graphic novel, there are things that get a little bit tired. It just kind of continues with the same. It explores different avenues certainly, but I personally don't find. I mean, I understand why people were upset about why it may have dropped off, but I still think it's better television than a lot of stuff out there. So anyway, I'm still committed.
Are you still reading the book? Are you
Uh,
like
I
ahead of where the show is, or
it really has diverged quite a bit. You know, there's definitely like liberties that they have taken with it. I pick it up every once in a while and I'll binge read a little bit. So, you know, but I can't say that I'm following it as closely as I used to. A little bit for the same reason that you just talked about. There's like only so, at least for me, there's only so much of the Walking Dead universe you can kind of live in without becoming a little bit tired of it. So I tend to choose the
okay?
show a little bit more. But yeah, that's. I agree with you though. I think that the journalism in that article, I think we probably read the same one, was pretty poor because like how do you even talk about ratings if you're not going to say
Yeah.
what they are?
Like I saw one that said AMC commits to money sucking Walking Dead, and then I'm like, well, all right, that's the headline, but it doesn't say anywhere that The Walking Dead is losing money.
Right, and I honestly, even with the show, like I just can't see the franchise to being like sucking money because they're like carrying a lot of things. So I don't
Yeah,
know.
there's two shows, three shows dedicated to this franchise, and they're selling all this merch, and it's propping up like an entire little sub
Right.
freaking economy. But yeah, so I don't know. Maybe we'll see some more about this going forward. But and I assume that the end of season 7 is going to have an impact on how the show continues. I think we're due for another season of Fear the Walking Dead this summer, for better or for worse. But yeah, we'll
I say
and of
for
course,
worse.
well, we'll see, right?
um,
Anyway, so yeah, should we move on to Girl with All the Gifts?
sure. And, you know, it's interesting. There's been a little bit, which you would expect, a flurry of articles and reviews that have come out since this was released on Friday. And it looks like it's actually having a little bit of a small run in a couple of theaters here in New York. It tends to be the more indie theaters here. Though shockingly, it's not at Alamo Drafthouse, which tends to pick up on these things. But it's also available on Amazon and on iTunes. So if you want to watch it in the comfort of your own home, you can, which is what I did. And so we've seen this. It's interesting to me that they decided to do this. We've seen this with a few films, just a different plan in terms of releasing it in the U.S. But after watching the film, I'll admit I'm a little bit surprised that they chose this route rather than just doing a full-on theater release. What are your thoughts on that?
I can't make heads or tails of the business decisions behind this. No, um, I guess I have more doubts or questions about the things that they decided to leave in or
Yeah,
remove from the plot too. But yeah, I think it was. People are saying that it's the best movie since 28 Days Later.
I don't know
It's
about that.
getting what people are saying that. So
They are
that's a
saying
fact.
that. I don't know if I agree with that, but yeah, go
So
ahead.
it's getting a good critical reception. So I think yeah, it's getting cheated a little bit with a less than full theatrical release.
I admit I didn't. I just when we were first talking about this, I just thought it was just an Amazon and a iTunes release, so I didn't even think about going to see it in the theater. Now I kind of wish I had. Though, admittedly, the convenience of being able to watch it at home is pretty cool. So, but I am a little surprised that it took this long to get here. So that's and just based upon the quality, clearly they had a good budget here. I'm definitely surprised at this tactic and wonder what happened. Just in sort of getting it in front of a U.S. audience. But are you ready to jump in?
Of course.
I always think that I think it is good in some ways, but also bad in some ways to have a creator like the writer, Mr. Carey, being involved in this. Because usually with a film like this that has so much detail from the book, you can go. I feel like they can run into some pitfalls, and some of it is trying to include too much. And I think you're always forced to make those decisions to fit everything into a feature film. You have to cut out some detail. And I feel like I was a little bit confused about why they cut out one of the biggest details in this book, just sort of what was the dynamics, the political climate in this world. So just to sort of set the stage, we're in a world where there's been something, and that's one of the nice things I think how they reveal in the book as well as in the film. They don't give you too much information. You just kind of see this weird school with children strapped into chairs and things like that. But as it comes to pass, they're all infected with something. And, you have this sort of group of military and scientists and teachers behind this fence. And it is you I feel like the reveal of the infection or of the contamination or whatever is really well done. How did you feel about that?
Yeah, the way that the sergeant rubs off the e-blocker and then they go
Right.
nuts. Yeah,
Right.
no, it's everything about the set in the classroom underground is just, and I mentioned this before when we saw the first trailer. It's just how I kind of pictured it when I
Mm-hmm.
was reading the book. This dark, windowless room, the way the wheelchairs. I mean, honestly, when they have a shot of Senia Nanua, who plays Melanie, being wheeled down the hallway, she looks super uncomfortable because the way the neck brace is like holding her head still, but the chair is wobbling a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you could tell. It's the chairs, the way that they're strapped in, the like dotted lines that they have each chair in facing the teacher. It's a really well done set. Considering they only have I think two scenes in there, maybe
Mm-hmm.
three. It's a well used set that works really well for this film. But I mean, I don't want to make it sound like you're spending a lot of time in that classroom because really
You're not.
I feel like I don't remember exactly if the book moves this quickly. I think it was longer because we had as we talked about on the podcast when we talked about the book is told from the perspective of several characters in the
Facility.
story.
Yep.
And there's a whole scene where soldiers are going outside the wire to collect fresh examples of
Right.
hungries, which they so there's a lot of that sort of stuff that's excised out of the beginning, which makes it feel extremely fast. So to the point where the base gets overrun is it feels like it's in the first 15 minutes, or maybe it's not, maybe it's like half an hour, but it
Right.
goes very quickly.
It does. I mean, I think, they had to lead up a little more. But one of the big things that they cut out of it, which I think also made the film move faster than the book, is the whole part of the political climate in the book is that you have this world and you have this group of people behind fences and ostensibly trying to figure out a cure and to whatever this is. But you also have a faction of people that have been left and in some ways have decided to stay outside of this environment, the Junkers. And they're part of the reason why the base gets overrun, but they totally cut that whole section, that whole plot line is gone.
Yeah.
So really it is just the Hungries versus the humans. Or the fungus versus the humans, I guess. And I did, I understand why they moved that out because it would take a lot to explain that. Maybe more. I think you could have streamlined it to make it make sense. But I felt like that storyline added a lot to the book because it wasn't just this one, you know, and maybe they kind of did that a little bit more with the teacher's perspective. But the Junkers had a very unique perspective about what was going on in the world and why they were staying, outside the fence and or why they were staying away from the government or that kind of thing. And I just felt like it made it a much more interesting plot. But
I don't
I
know that
think,
we ever learned that much about the motivations of the Junkers. We knew that they were like the force of anarchy and nihilism, but
yeah,
what we lose with them not being included is a sense of that the world is still populated.
right,
Like the film feels very much like there's just these last couple folks, and while the book kind of hints at that at points in the plot, the movie feels like they're the last couple folks a lot. They
right,
try to they try to do a few things to make you not feel that way. Like they introduce a voice from Beacon even at the end of the movie, which in the book they never do
no,
because we find out from Sergeant Parks later on in the book's plot that he hasn't even heard from Beacon in 6 months.
right.
So they do a few like trades to make it feel like the world isn't completely Hungry's and our little core of characters.
But I
But
don't
and
know. I don't know that it's successful though, because it still kind of feels that way.
because at the end of the day, you've only got four humans on screen.
Right.
you know, the base does feel very populated at first, especially when Melanie's being taken to Caldwell's lab. There's all kinds of people running around, but then you can also tell that well, things aren't going well at
No.
all.
No, and I actually the scene where the base just kind of it just goes out of control, which, as you said, very quickly into the film. I just thought that that was a phenomenal bit of
Oh,
choreography.
oh yeah.
I think that the effects with the Hungries is just so good. With the kids when they first reveal it, and you have this, kind of normal kid, you're just like, why are they all strapped down to the chair? And then when Park just shows you why, it's so disturbing. And you know how I feel
Hmm.
about zombie kids, freaking hate
Oh
them.
yeah. Yeah.
And so there's that. But then in Caldwell's lab, when her assistant, she tells her assistant to put down the middle shutters because they want to continue with, her experimentation to find a cure. The whole scene, there is just a gorgeous scene where you just see it coming, and it's just incredible. Where one of the Hungries just comes in and just destroys the glass and takes out the assistant, and then the
In one
assistant's.
take, right? I mean, it
Oh,
looked like
it's
it was well,
amazing!
not,
It's
maybe not one
amazing.
take, but it was one shot.
It was one
Yeah,
shot.
it's
It was really
fantastic.
good, really
I
good.
guess if I still have one more like beef about the way that the base collapses is in the book makes it more plausible that the humans have survived 20 years since the hungry thing happened.
Right.
They're like apocalypse plus 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we don't get a time frame in the film at all, and that's fine. Whatever. You can kind of tell that it's been a long time based on the set, especially when they get to London. But for the Hungries to just kind of overrun the base without help from the Junkers as they get in the book, because the Junkers are the ones who drive through the gates. But
Right, which makes
the
sense.
base has lasted with its perimeter fence for 20 years in the book versus Hungries because that's a status quo. So it's kind of odd that the Hungries are able to overrun the base without any kind of game changer in the movie. But I guess if you don't have the other thing to be curious about, you're not even going to consider it. You're just like, of course, zombies overrun fences. That's kind of what we are trained to believe in canon.
Right, but that's the part I think I missed the most. Just because it felt like there should have been a catalyst, and obviously because this base has survived so long, they even have people out there shooting the Hungries, like the military people, to just show you kind of where it is, and I don't like where they're at, and I just don't feel like it made a ton of sense that things happen like they did. But hey, I think you do have to make these kind of decisions to streamline the plot. So but it would have been a little bit better, I think, a little better if they had added that in. And also, just, again, in terms of making the world seem a little bit more populated, the Junkers definitely sort of helped that idea along in the book. The other thing that I thought that they helped is that you have this feeling that people out in this world would definitely have a hard time surviving, but the Junkers somehow manage it. So just sort of the difference between the base people who are used to living behind this fence and the Junker people who are used to just kind of living in this world. I thought that contrast was really interesting. So,
Yeah.
but I still think the other thing that the, the food source for the Hungries doesn't make sense to me. Just because if things are this desolate, like you can find sort of random animals, but there's like one, like it doesn't make total sense to me that this would be a plan that would work for the fungus overall. And because they've taken out the plot line and you don't really see that there's that many other people, I just don't know how this would work in the long run with them taking over the planet in any kind of a way that they would be able to survive.
But as you've already said, the fall of the base is an amazingly choreographed, like chaotic scene. The scene in Caldwell's lab is amazing too. What we don't understand is how Caldwell gets from that behind that door that she goes into the back of Sergeant Park's truck, and I don't know that that was explained in the book either, honestly. But
No.
she makes it somehow to the crew that gets off the base.
Well, she's
Um,
irascible, clearly. She's just kind of this ornery character that will never go away.
Yeah.
And it is kind of funny when you see her in the back of the van, like the last character, like the last person that Ms. Justino and Melanie really want to see is Caldwell, and
Hmm.
of course she's there. So, but the cast here, I felt like, what did you think about Glenn Close? I thought she was awesome.
She was really, yeah, she was fantastic. She
You
did a
hate
great
her.
job.
You hate her,
You
but you
sure.
also understand where she's coming from. So it's like this weird double, like this sort of conflicting feeling.
And that's totally, Carrie, that he wrote that for Caldwell. That was her whole thing, was like unapologetic scientific progress. Doesn't matter if she's dissecting children's brains. That's the game. Have you ever seen The Expanse? I know I've talked about it to you before.
Yeah, I've seen a little bit of it. I actually went to they did a premiere of the second season, and
Hmm.
where they gave sort of a sneak preview of the first couple episodes for this season, and also a bunch of the cast members were there. So I saw, what is the actress's name?
Dominique Tipper.
I was really excited to see her there, and I actually thought, like at first when I was watching this, that they were going to have her have a bigger role in Alas No, but I still think
No,
she's amazing.
she gets a couple of lines, and then she gets her throat torn out. But I mean, it's her signature lady mohawk
Yep.
that reminds you of, like, oh wait, I've seen her in space,
Yep.
and now she's in an underground bunker with zombie children.
She's
So yeah, it
pretty
was,
she's pretty cool no matter what the setting though.
yeah. Obviously, her role in the Expanse is much larger, and she's a total badass on that show, and she's pretty badass on this in this movie too. But she's not one of the good guys, so she doesn't make it.
Nope.
I also wanted to point out that I'm pretty sure that Kieran Gallagher is shooting a Russian light machine gun on the top of that van when he picks them up. Just
Ah. Do
pointing
you
it out. That looks like a PKM to
do you
me.
think
And
that was a deliberate so that it's like worldwide cooperation?
no, I think that's a
A
well. We
mistake?
need a machine gun. Where
Hmm.
do we get a machine gun?
Hmm.
So that's just I could be wrong, but I've done some research and I think that's what it was. Anyway, it's clearly not like a design that we have in the current military world of a, like, you sit on top of the cab of a truck with a machine gun in some sort of little position. It makes sense for this plot because they put Melanie up there later, and it's like a great little seat for her. And I'm pretty sure that's how they. I don't remember exactly how they described the vehicle in the book. It didn't last that long. I thought it was even just a Humvee.
I think it might have. I think you're right. I think it might have been just a Hummer. And I did like the visual though, because that is kind of how I pictured it, like her in sort of a Hannibal Lecter like
Hmm.
way on top of whatever vehicle they put her on, and I felt like this was probably a better idea creatively because she's up high, and made more sense to me. But you know, this actor, Senia Nanua, is so good though. She really was amazing, and I felt like she was exactly what I was visualizing when I read this book.
I think the only time when I didn't buy her performance a little, when, and I don't mean to be too critical because she's like 11 years old or whatever, was when she's trying to communicate with, or when she's trying to intimidate the other hungry children.
Oh,
Um,
so I didn't know we
just
were gonna jump into that scene too quickly, but I would
Well,
say
just
that
saying, like,
that's
if we're talking about her performance overall, that's the only area when I was like, oh, okay.
well, I would say that that is one of the weakest scenes in the entire film, and I felt like it could have been done a lot better. I don't know how well you can act when they just tell you to yell at or scream in a guttural way at feral
Yeah,
children.
yeah,
I agree with you though. I think that was a pretty weak scene and was way too long, and just could have been. I feel like could have been shortened. They could have changed the idea of it. I think you could have gotten the point across, which is sort of a little bit of a dominance display. You could have done that really quickly and with not as much weird, silly shouting.
yeah,
I don't know. I thought that was pretty lame myself.
yeah. Okay. Well, I didn't mean to get too far ahead, but frankly, the movie moves pretty quickly from when they get off the base. There's three soldiers, Caldwell, what's her name, Justino, and Melanie. They quickly lose one more soldier.
And actually, I thought that that was great too. It was just the one thing. So they kind of get off this base in this weird, this little sort of what would you call it? Like, I mean, it's just kind of a
It's like a
military
milk delivery
van.
truck.
Yeah, it's kind of what it looks like. It's painted, in military green or whatever. It's reinforced. They throw Melanie up on the top in this weird chair. But they don't really have any supplies. They took the truck from a repair station, so it wasn't outfitted to go outside. And they really need water, and so they go and they're looking for water. And this was the weird thing. When they're getting it, one of the soldiers like gets sort of nervous and shoots off his gun randomly, and I thought it was really weird how they all just kind of waited to see what would happen, because pretty much you gotta just run, from what I was already knew about these particular like infected. And they just kind of hang out until people start running through the woods at them, which I was like, okay. But the soldier gets, we don't know if nobody sees if he gets bitten or not, but as they're going back into the van, Sergeant Parks basically won't let him back in, because he's like, you're hurt. Look at your arm. And he's like, oh no, I snagged it on something. He's like, let's wait. And it happens. The transformation from bite or like transmission to infection in adults is like lightning fast in this film. And he turns pretty quickly. And also the transformation, I thought, again, was really successful. These things are totally terrifying. The weird sort of teeth gnashing that they do, like the sort of
Wow.
jerk when they're taken over, I thought was amazing.
I don't really like the because the Dr. Caldwell's assistant also does it when she turns, and some of the other biter children or hungry children do it. It reminds me of World War Z, and I remember criticizing it then too when they just kind of click their teeth together. It feels a little cheesy.
I
It's
felt
supposed to be threatening or intimidating, and I'm just like, you're just clacking your teeth like a pair of joke teeth.
at least in this film, I viewed it as something more like, and maybe it's because like the way that they describe it in the book, it's like this entity taking over a body that they don't know what to do with it, and so they're just out of control, and don't even know what to do and what their bodies are doing. So that's what I kind of viewed it as, a body totally out of control.
Hmm.
But wasn't bothered by the Joker teeth as much as I was in World War Z.
Well, after they leave the river, they go to basically the next thing that happens is they come up on, is it London or is it just a big town between them and London? They they find a place that's full of zombies, and they use their e-blocker to its maximum effect by walking through a whole posse. These are pretty tense scenes. This is very close to the book too,
Mm-hmm.
where Caldwell has her inability. It's like in one scene before, she's telling Park, "We're not children. You don't have to tell us how to
I
do
know.
this." And then the next scene, she's interacting with a zombie in a way that is less than advisable, and they end up
Well,
running into the hospital.
it is interesting though, because as they're walking through this group of hungries, they kind of go into a stasis. So with the e-blocker, they're supposed to stay that way. And what piques Caldwell's interest is that there's one that's like walking a baby carriage around, which is really weird. And we see this in the book too, where you see a couple of the hungries doing these sort of like mirror behaviors or things that they're remembering, and they're not in stasis, which is unusual. And Caldwell just can't help herself, but she's just totally fascinated by this behavior, which it seems like it's newly observed behavior, because she says she's never seen it before, and this is now how many years into this process. So that's kind of an
Right.
interesting piece of information. And also, it fills out the storyline a little bit with her, which is, she's viewing them as things. She's trying to look at things in a purely scientific way. And there's just a lot of things that she's observing where she can't necessarily kind of stick to her original idea, which is that they're not sort of independently, that Melanie and the other children are not independent entities on their own, that she's basically like, you're just the fungus operating a body like a robot. So that was kind of cool, but at least it led to them being sort of stuck in the hospital and moving the story along a line along there. I also think it's interesting, the transformation, about the relationship between Parks and Melanie,
Hmm.
from what we see in the beginning. And then, even when Melanie is rescued, or they take Melanie with them. Ms. Justineau tries to set her free, and then they start using her as almost like a scout.
Yeah, it's definitely there. I mean, the whole movie is very about this like mirror relationship between Justineau Parks too and Melanie at the beginning. Melanie's 100% a prisoner, and by the end, of
Mm-hmm.
course, you've got a different scenario.
Yep.
And in this middle part, they're giving her more freedom, and she's realizing the power that she has, and that whole relationship is changing. She basically saves their asses getting out of the hospital after it got surrounded by all the hungries.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I'm having trouble remembering exactly everything from the book, but I remember this hospital scene being kind of more important because they discover like a zombie that had been doing some sort of behavior that it was doing in life.
Yeah,
In the movie, they just find a guy in a straitjacket that's eating himself.
yeah, but no, you're right. I thought that they found one or two in the hospital. No, there were. I feel like it was like they just came upon this room and it was doing something
Like
similar,
reading, it was reading a book, I think, or something like
something
that.
like that, or it was similar to the one with the baby carriage. Like it was just kind of doing the stuff that it had done.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of interesting, and also, and they did this a little bit with Melanie, and like conversations between her and Sergeant Parks, and then the other soldier where they're talking about reading and stuff like that. Just so they did that, but they didn't sort of push along the behavioral storyline as they did in the book here.
So you kind of you have some scenes here with Melanie and Kieran are getting along. Justineau is basically threatening violence against Caldwell if she tries anything on Melanie, just underlining that relationship of protection, which definitely is. I don't know. Like Caldwell is all malicious intent. God. Glenn Close is really good with this role. Like
She
anytime
said,
she's having a conversation with Melanie, it's kind of scary.
yeah, it's totally terrifying. Like she is very, she is not warm and fuzzy in any way. And she is, I mean, she feels as if she is morally correct here. She's not, she's basically not sugarcoating anything, but and says continually that she needs Melanie's brain and spine to create a vaccine, to create a cure. That she knows that it's hard, but you have to do hard things to save the human race. That this is a reason why Melanie should be sacrificed, and she says this from the very beginning. So we see this in the beginning when she has weird interactions with Melanie from the get go, but the minute she gets Melanie into her lab, it's like so terrifying because she like has her knocked out, but she doesn't get fully knocked out, and you know you have Ms. Justineau trying to stop her from the beginning, which is why Melanie saves the teacher, saves Ms. Justineau. But we see this theme like with Dr. Caldwell throughout, which we did see in the book too. Like she is unwavering
Hmm.
in her task, which is and she's unwavering in the face of like a pretty serious arm injury. She's pretty sick, and knows she's gonna die. So
But
it's not.
imagine being in her shoes 20 years into her research. She's done stuff like built these mobile labs that
Mm-hmm.
she talks about it late when they find that. She's 20 years in and she feels like she is there. She's at the cusp of
Yep.
of creating a vaccine for the first time. So I can definitely empathize with she just wants to do it. She's like, and that kind of explains more. I mean, she's also delirious by the time we get to the end of the film, but it also explains why she kind of does the thing she does, going after Melanie and kind of her exit, just based on she's so close to a cure. And if you think about it, she's in a way the most sympathetic character
Mm-hmm.
when you think about it that way. I mean, obviously everybody else is empathizing with Melanie, but by the end, Melanie isn't empathizing with our human heroes.
Well, also, if you look at it, and this is part of why I think the book was so successful and so creepy, is that if you look at sort of what this fungus, what it does is, it's based upon a fungus that takes over like ants, and then they go and do things in order to propagate the fungus. And that's kind of what it's doing with the humans. Like, it's looking to propagate itself, it's looking to get to the next level, to take over, to survive. And if you look at it from that perspective, Melanie is doing everything that she can to survive. And maybe she looks like a kid, but she's actually not acting like a human. She's like a totally different beast. And so if you look at this from a human perspective, people should be cheering Glenn Close on because she's the only one that's really going to be making it possible for humans to survive. If we're looking at this from a true human perspective, I think that the Glenn Close character, Dr. Caldwell, is really the one we should be cheering on. And it's just, that's the sort of beauty of this book, is that you're meant to sympathize because Melanie's a kid and you're seeing a lot of things from her perspective.
Yeah, it's like a evolution
Right.
cheerleader book where, we're the Neanderthals in this scenario. Honestly, it's weird to me, though. It's weird that Helen Justineau can really be as sympathetic as she is, and I think there's a lot of regret in that final scene of the film.
Yep.
Um,
Just a bit, but what are you going to do?
yeah, exactly. Her hands are tied. What Another thing that I wanted to kind of question as far as this film goes was the the decision to okay, so they showed matches
Mm-hmm.
when they got into the Rosalind Franklin,
Yeah.
but they didn't ever explain that matches or fire might be a method by which they could burst open the seed pods.
Oh
They
no,
definitely
they
talk
they
they
do.
talk about the seed pods. They say, oh, but it's a flawed design. But they don't actually talk about the need to light them on fire. That doesn't come up, which I thought was a little bit strange.
No, no, because Caldwell does talk. She says that to Melanie during their final confrontation when she's basically trying to convince Melanie to go through with, like, basically sacrificing herself to save Miss Justineau. She basically says that right now those seed pods look like harmless or look like they can't get to the next level, but one flood, one brush fire, and everything is done because it will
Oh,
be distributed into the air. So she does. It's a little quick, but definitely that is where Melanie gets the idea.
it was felt very like a pregnant thing where Justino picks up the matchbook, rattles it when they get into the lab, and then she puts it down, and you see Melanie watch her do that. I'm like, well, that's kind of suggestive. Why would she be watching her juggle some matches so closely? Um,
Well, she's, I mean, that's and I think that's the whole thing. Like, she watches everybody. Like, she's learning from all these adults around her and the things that they're doing. She's very observant. And we even see her say that when the unfortunate Parks reaches his end, and
yeah.
she knows how to, like, work his gun. And he even says, "Oh, how'd you learn how to do that?" And she's like, "I learned it by watching you."
Hmm.
But yeah, I think it was a little ridiculous in the way that it was a little too obvious with the matches, but there's definitely, you can see where it went,
Okay, yeah,
with the
fair enough.
speech from Caldwell. But the Caldwell speech wasn't as obvious, I think, as it was in the book. So
I think it was even Melanie's idea in the book when she's like, "Yeah, so there's these forests where they need wildfire in order to open the seed pods or whatever." So,
yeah, in the book it
in
was all
that in
Melanie.
that she kind of just taught herself, because it's more clear in the book too. I mean, we know that she's a really bright kid and she can recite the periodic table, for instance, in the movie, but in the book, you're even more aware of her level of intelligence, which
Mm-hmm.
is kind of stunning.
Right.
It's hard to get that across. I think much harder to get that across in film. But the final speech between her and Caldwell is really good. She's taking off her shoes. She's like, "I will sacrifice myself for Justino." And then finally she says, "Wait, do you still think that I'm just pretending to be alive, or am I actually alive?" And Caldwell says, "Yeah, I think you're actually alive." And then she's like, "Well, then why do I have to die for you?"
Right. But
Obviously, she
also,
switches there. Go, go ahead.
no, yeah, she switches her whole thought process. But I also loved the whole scene, where that Caldwell has basically put whatever it is into the air to like, and she has like the gas mask on and everything. She looks totally
Hmm.
crazy
Hmm.
to take out all of them, and brings Melanie in on the table, and Melanie like is totally like, oh, I don't even really need to breathe. And it's just this like super creepy moment where and you're basically dealing with this alien entity, and
Hmm.
that's what the conversation between Caldwell and Melanie are really, it's just really interesting, and I thought was one of the best scenes in the film is this sort of philosophical discussion about existence and evolution.
It also explains the beginning of the film where you just hear her voice and she's counting, and then you see her face and her lips aren't moving, and you understand now
Why?
that she was actually just counting to 1,000, and you kind of hear her breathe in too. So that
Yep.
makes more sense then.
The end scene is as creepy as you would expect it to be, and mirrors pretty much what the book shows, which is how the tables have turned now. Although here in the film she intended to save Sergeant Parks as well, though he succumbs to the sort of initial pod burst of like, all the fungus going around the world. But Helen Justineau is stuck in like a little rat in a cage. She's like kind of like a hamster
Hmm.
in the lab with the air turned off. I don't know how long she's going to survive in there.
Uh, yeah, I don't know that there was food.
Well, there's that, and anytime you like, how do you if there, even if there is food, how do you decontaminate everything enough or get it into her without her sucking in some of those fungus seeds or whatever it is?
Given that it's a mobile lab, I'm sure they have CO2 scrubbers, some sort of like hermetically sealed, but refreshing the air that's in there. I would assume. Like I could jump to that conclusion.
But it does feel, it's it's a super kind of creepy, scary ending.
Hmm.
She doesn't seem quite as upset as you would expect her to, though.
She just seems to realize that she's the last human being on Earth, and she's teaching the next species how
Yeah.
to read and write, uh, which is a good start. And there's a lot of kids in orange jumpsuits or orange hoodies and sweatpants. Do you think that are they suggesting that Melanie went back to Hotel Echo and freed all the other children?
Yep, I think that's exactly what they did.
Yeah.
Though I kind of feel like, again, the one piece that just kept bothering me throughout this film is like, what is the food source that all these kids are eating?
Right.
Because there's nothing, and they do need like either animals or humans or whatever. They do need like, it's not like they're just sort of taking in water or nutrients from the ground. They don't. I mean, maybe they've evolved beyond that, but I don't think that was the case. And it's not. We saw that Melanie needed to eat
Yeah.
every whatever. I also, especially given that fact, even though she's sort of oddly keeping dominance over them, I don't know that they'd be like super psyched about their like having a snack right in front of them. Whether it's teaching them, periodic tables or not. I just don't know that that would have been a sustainable situation if she's the only snack left.
True. At least they can't smell her, but these ones are supposedly smart enough to know that she's still edible.
Right.
Yeah, it's not a sustainable species if they need protein to live and they've eaten all the protein. Unless they're starting to photosynthesize, I don't see how they're gonna make it.
Yeah, but all these are just minor points. I did overall enjoy this film, other than the scene you had mentioned, the weird Melanie Lord of the Flies scene. But I really thought that this was. I would not put it in the same caliber as 28 Days Later, but I do think it's one of the more successful films I've seen, and it's super creepy. I think, partly because of the zombie kids, but it's also just the idea of having this, sort of entity running around looking like a human child, and kind of doing these things independently. That's a terrifying thought. And I do think that despite the sort of illogical, the sort of, you have to suspend disbelief and realize that there aren't food sources around, but I still thought it was successful, and I'm surprised that it just didn't do as well at the box office. even overseas, because it just, I thought that the editing was great. The cast was amazing. I thought the plot was, despite a couple of holes, pretty good and better than others we've seen.
Hmm.
So it surprises me a little, and definitely makes me wonder if there's like behind the scenes things that we don't know about, from a distribution, like the distribution, like maybe there was like weird stuff about it there. But what are your thoughts on that?
It's hard to read a book and then watch a movie that is so close to that book.
Mm-hmm.
So since they took out the parts of the about the Junkers that I thought helped the film as far as making it feel more alive in the storyline, I think they should have introduced something else. And like I
Mm-hmm.
said, they did introduce the radio call from Beacon to let you know that, hey, oh, Beacon's there. Oh wait, no, they're being overrun. And they have Caldwell mention that she'd been to Bristol and seen some of the similar fungal growths, and that the team in Glasgow said they're appearing everywhere. Like they try through these sort of things to make it feel more populated, but ultimately the movie needed another element, in my opinion.
And as I said, I wish I had seen, especially with some of the effects and some of the more like terrifying scenes. I wish I had seen it in the theater, but I still recommend it. And if you're renting it for like $7 or whatever on Amazon or on iTunes, I still think that's like, and you're into this kind of thing. I think that's clear too. You have to be into this kind of thing. I think it's better than a lot of stuff I've seen lately. I wonder if there's some like having Mr. Carey there on set. Maybe that is not necessarily a good thing. One of the things that I think you see is there's writers that do a great job at building characters and building worlds, and then it's almost like they can't necessarily be involved in the process with the movie somehow, because it makes it not, it's hard to make those decisions with them involved. Like maybe they're just a little too married to certain ideas. They can't kill their darlings, so to speak. And some of this I've seen, and mainly I'm thinking of Stephen King here, in some of the more successful films that have been made based upon his short stories or whatever, he has no creative control over it.
Hmm.
And I think that may be a good thing. So I don't know what happened here, and why they decided to cut out some of the things. I'm sure there's some interviews where they talk about this. But I do think that you're correct. I think they should have added something in to make that political climate, to make some of the stakes a little higher, and to have that understanding about what some of the forces outside of the fence were. And also, again, to make the world seem more populated. But
Yeah,
that's all I have to say. Generally, do you have anything to add?
that's about it. It's a good movie. It's just I think I don't know. I probably would have liked it more if I hadn't read the book first.
I see. I don't have that problem necessarily. I like both, and I can look at them as separate entities. And maybe it's also because I didn't reread the book before watching this deliberately. But I would probably feel a little differently if I had just read the book. But yeah. So that's all I have to say about that. If any of you zombie fans have comments or watched this and loved it, watched it, hated it, we'd like to hear from you. So send us an email at reanimatedpodcast@gmail.com, or tweet at us, reanimatedpcast, or you can leave us a note on our site, reanimatedpodcast.com. Next week, we'll be discussing Rec 2, and until then, ciao.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Adios.